The water splashed against Emma Nelson's face, cold and brutal, as the rushing current threatened to swallow her whole. The year was 1879, and what had begun as a routine crossing of the Eagle River in Colorado Territory had turned into a fight for her life. One moment she was guiding her wagon team across what seemed a manageable ford, and the next, the riverbed had given way beneath the wheels, pitching the vehicle into the swollen waters of the spring runoff. "Help!" she cried out, her voice nearly drowned by the roaring waters. Her trunks, supplies, and the few worldly possessions she had brought west were now floating away in the murky torrent. The horses thrashed in their harnesses, panicked and wild-eyed as the wagon lurched sideways. Emma clung to the driver's bench as it began to sink. 24 years of life flashed before her eyes leaving Boston after her parents' deaths. The long journey west to stake a claim on a new beginning, all to end here in a nameless stretch of river miles from her destination. A thundering of hooves sounded over the rush of water, and a deep voice cut through her panic. "Hold on, madam." Through water-blurred vision, she saw a rider urging his horse into the river, the animal's powerful legs churning against the current. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat, a worn leather vest over a checked shirt, and determination etched across his sun-weathered face. "Don't let go," the stranger called as he maneuvered his horse alongside the rapidly sinking wagon. He reached out a strong, tanned hand toward her. Emma stretched her arm toward him, their fingers almost touching when the wagon shifted again, tipping further. Water gushed over the bench, soaking her skirts and pulling her down. The cowboy leapt from his saddle into the shallower part of the river, fighting the current as he waded to her. The water was at her waist now, the wagon groaning as it settled deeper. "The wagon's sinking in the river's current," she gasped, struggling to keep her head above water. The cowboy reached her, his arm circling her waist. "Hold on tight, I've got you," he said, his voice steady and sure. Emma's fingers clutched at his shirt as he pulled her free of the wagon just as it slipped beneath the surface with a final, mournful creak. The horses, freed from their harnesses by the cowboy's quick work with a knife, swam frantically for shore. "Wrap your arms around my neck," he instructed, and Emma complied without hesitation. With powerful strokes, he began swimming toward the bank, fighting against the pull of the river that wanted to claim them both. By the time they reached the shore, Emma was shivering uncontrollably, her sodden dress weighing her down like anchor chain. The cowboy half carried her to where his horse waited, pawing nervously at the ground. "Zachary Eaves," he introduced himself, his breathing only slightly labored despite the exertion. "Most folks call me Zach." "Emma Nelson," she replied through chattering teeth. I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Eaves." He nodded, his eyes a startling shade of blue against his tanned skin, assessing her condition. "You're freezing. My cabin's not far. We need to get you warm and dry before nightfall." Emma glanced back at the river where her wagon had disappeared. "Everything I own was in that wagon," she whispered, the enormity of her loss beginning to sink in. "Your life wasn't," Zach said simply. "And that's what matters right now." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. "Leadville's still a few days' ride from here. Where were you headed?" "There," Emma admitted. "I have a teaching position waiting, or I had one, without my credentials and letters of introduction." "Let's worry about one thing at a time," Zach interrupted gently, urging his horse forward. "First, we get you warm, then we'll figure out the rest." As they rode away from the river, Emma leaned back slightly against the solid warmth of her rescuer, too exhausted and grateful to worry about propriety. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the rugged Colorado landscape. Behind them, the Eagle River continued its relentless journey, having claimed another victim in its ancient battle with human ambition. What Emma couldn't know then, as she shivered against Zachary Eaves' chest, was that this disaster marked not an ending, but a beginning one that would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Zach's cabin stood in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees, modest but sturdy against the elements. It was a simple one-room structure with a stone chimney, the kind of utilitarian shelter common to men who worked the land and cattle in the territories. "It's not much," he said as he helped Emma down from the horse, her legs wobbly beneath her. "But it's dry and the fire catches quickly." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly orderly for a bachelor's dwelling. A narrow bed with a homespun quilt occupied one wall, a table and 2 chairs another, and a small cook stove dominated the remaining space. Shelves held provisions, cooking utensils, and unexpectedly, several books. "You raid," Emma observed, her teeth still chattering despite her effort to control it. Zach nodded as he busied himself with the fire. "When there's time, mostly in winter." He gestured to a trunk at the foot of the bed. "There are some clothes in there. Nothing that'll fit you properly, but they're dry." Emma hesitated, acutely aware of her predicament. She was alone in a stranger's cabin, miles from civilization, without possessions or proper attire. Yet this man had risked his life to save hers, and there was something in his direct gaze that inspired trust rather than fear. "I'll wait outside while you change," Zach said, sensing her discomfort. He grabbed a bucket from beside the door. "Need to fetch more water anyway." Once alone, Emma peeled off her sodden clothing, hanging the dripping garments near the growing fire. From the trunk, she selected the smallest shirt she could find, and a pair of trousers that required substantial rolling at the ankles and waist. The impropriety of wearing men's clothing paled against the need for warmth and dryness. When Zach returned, he paused momentarily at the sight of her in his clothes before setting the water bucket down with deliberate care. "Better." "Much thank you," Emma replied, attempting to tuck the oversized shirt more securely. "Mr. Eaves, I cannot express, just Zach," he interrupted. "And no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "I suspect that's not true," Emma countered. "The river was dangerous." "You risked your life," he shrugged, moving to the stove. "Got soup from yesterday, not fancy but it's hot." As he worked, Emma studied her rescuer more carefully. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical labor. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and his beard was neatly trimmed, contrary to the wild appearance of many frontiersmen she'd encountered on her journey west. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, though the weathering from outdoor life made precise aging difficult. "Are you a rancher?" she asked as he placed a steaming bowl before her. "Of sorts," Zach replied. "Got a small spread a few miles north. Run about 60 head of cattle with my partner, Will Thomas. He handles most of it these days while I scout and hunt for the mining operations around Leadville." Emma wrapped her fingers around the warm bowl. "That's where I was headed. Leadville," she hesitated. "I'm to be the new school teacher." Zach's eyebrows rose. "You're Miss Nelson, the one from back east. You knew I was coming." "Word travels," he explained. "Town's been without a proper teacher since last winter when Mrs. Holliday took ill and returned east. The children have been running wild or working the mines." The mention of children working brought a frown to Emma's face. "That's precisely why I accepted the position. Education is the only path forward for those children." "Noble sentiment," Zach said, though without mockery. "But Leadville's a mining town. Families there think more about putting food on the table than Latin declensions." "Which is exactly why they need someone to show them there's more to life," Emma replied with unexpected heat. I may have lost my possessions today, Mr. Eaves, but I have not lost my purpose. A smile ghosted across his face. Didn't mean to suggest otherwise. Just warning you that it won't be like Boston schools. Emma stared into her soup. I'm well aware, but every child deserves a chance at something better, don't you think? Zach studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Maybe so. He rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the lengthening shadows. I'll ride to Leadville tomorrow, let them know what happened and that you're safe. We can see about retrieving what might have washed downstream from your wagon, too. You've already done so much, Emma protested. And left the job half finished, he shook his head. That's not my way, you rest here. I'll be back by nightfall tomorrow. As darkness fell, the practicalities of their situation became apparent. There was only one bed in the small cabin. I'll sleep by the fire, Zach announced, unrolling a bedroll on the floor before Emma could even raise the question. This is your home. I couldn't possibly, madam, he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. My mother would rise from her grave and tan my hide if I took the bed while a lady slept on the floor. His expression softened slightly. Get some rest. You've had a hard day. Despite her exhaustion, Emma found sleep elusive. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind the terror as the wagon began to sink, the cold grip of the water, the certainty that she would die there in that nameless river crossing. And then Zachary Eaves, appearing like some rugged guardian angel, pulling her from death's grasp with a strength that seemed almost mythical in retrospect. From his place by the fire, she heard his steady breathing, not quite a snore but the deep, even respiration of a man accustomed to sleeping under the stars. There was something comforting in the sound, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this vast wilderness that had nearly claimed her life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: how to proceed without her belongings, how to establish her credibility in Leadville without her letters and credentials. But for tonight, she was safe, warm, and unexpectedly grateful for the twist of fate that had brought Zachary Eaves to that river crossing at precisely the moment she needed him most. Dawn came with golden fingers of light through the cabin's single window. Emma woke to find Zach already up, tending the fire and preparing coffee. The aroma filled the small space, rich and inviting. You sleep all right? He asked, passing her a steaming cup. Better than expected, she admitted. Thank you. They shared a simple breakfast of cornbread and jerky. As Zach prepared to leave for Leadville, Emma found herself surprisingly reluctant to see him go. I've left water, food, and plenty of firewood, he explained, buckling on his gun belt. Should be back before dark. Keep the door barred, though it's unlikely anyone would come this way. I'll be fine, Emma assured him. Please just be careful. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps at her concern. Always am. He settled his hat on his head, nodded once, and was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the morning. Alone in the cabin, Emma took stock of her situation. Her clothes were mostly dry, though still stained and wrinkled from their river immersion. She found a needle and thread among Zach's sparse belongings, and set about repairing a tear in her skirt, grateful for something useful to occupy her hands and mind. The quiet of the cabin and surrounding forest was profound after the constant bustle of travel. For weeks, she'd been surrounded by the noise of wagon trains, stage coaches, and fellow travelers. Now there was only the crackle of the fire, the distant call of birds, and occasionally the rustle of wind through the pines outside. By midday, Emma had mended her clothing as best she could and explored the cabin more thoroughly. The books on Zach's shelf revealed an eclectic taste: a well-worn Bible, Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales, a volume of Emerson's essays, and surprisingly, Shakespeare's collected works. She ran her fingers over the leather binding of the latter, wondering about the man who had saved her. There was little to indicate personal history in the cabin, no photographs, letters, or keepsakes. It was as if Zachary Eaves existed only in the present moment, unencumbered by past or future. Emma found herself drawn to the window throughout the afternoon, watching the path for his return. The light was beginning to fade when she finally heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by embarrassment at the intensity of her reaction. Zach wasn't alone. A second horse followed his, laden with parcels and bundles. He dismounted with fluid grace, then helped down a woman heavyset, gray-haired, with a kind face creased by sun and years. Emma opened the door before they could knock, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance and the borrowed men's clothing she still wore. "Miss Nelson," Zach said formally, "this is Mrs. Abigail Fletcher from Leadville. She's brought some things you might need." Mrs. Fletcher stepped forward with a warm smile. "My dear girl, what an ordeal you've had. When Zachary rode in with the news, the whole town was in a state. We've all been so looking forward to your arrival." The older woman's motherly concern brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes. "You're very kind, Mrs. Fletcher." "Nonsense," the woman replied, bustling into the cabin. "We take care of our own in Leadville, and you're one of us now. I've brought some clothing, necessities, and a few things to tide you over until we can properly outfit you." She turned to Zach. "Mr. Eaves, if you'd be so good as to wait outside while I help Miss Nelson change." Zach nodded and retreated, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Mrs. Fletcher unpacked her bundles efficiently, revealing several dresses, undergarments, a sturdy pair of boots, and various toiletries. "These belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Denver," she explained. "She's about your size, perhaps a bit fuller in the bosom, but we can adjust that." Emma changed gratefully into one of the dresses, a practical blue cotton that needed only minor adjustments at the waist. Mrs. Fletcher helped her arrange her hair, clucking sympathetically over its condition after the river dunking. "There now," the older woman said, stepping back to survey her work. "You look more the part of our schoolmistress." "I cannot thank you enough," Emma said. "But I fear I have nothing to offer in return." Mrs. Fletcher waved away her concerns. "Your thanks is enough. Besides, my youngest boy will be in your classroom come fall. I have a vested interest in your well-being." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Though I must say, being rescued by Zachary Eaves, many a young woman in Leadville would trade places with you in a heartbeat, river dunking and all." "Oh," Emma felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Quite the eligible bachelor, our Mr. Eaves. Keeps to himself mostly, but respected by all. Even the mining companies value his word, and they're not known for trusting independent men." Mrs. Fletcher gathered up Emma's borrowed men's clothing. "I'll just return these to him, shall I?" When Zach was invited back in, Emma noticed his quick, appreciative glance at her transformed appearance before he carefully schooled his features to neutrality. "I've explained to Miss Nelson that the school term doesn't begin for another 3 weeks," Mrs. Fletcher said. "Plenty of time for her to recover from this ordeal and properly settle in Leadville." Zach nodded. "I told the town council what happened. They're sending men to search the riverbanks for any of your belongings that might have washed up." "That's very kind, but they needn't go to such trouble," Emma said. "No trouble," he replied. "The river's taken enough from travelers that folks are accustomed to helping when they can." Mrs. Fletcher cleared her throat. "Now, as to accommodations. Miss Nelson, we had arranged a room for you above the Mercantile in town, but it won't be ready for another week at least." Mr. Eaves has suggested you might continue to stay here until then, with me coming out to stay as a chaperone, of course. Emma blinked in surprise. I wouldn't want to impose further. No imposition, Zach said. I often camp with the herd this time of year anyway. Cabin would be sitting empty. There was something in his manner, a careful distance that hadn't been there before Mrs. Fletcher's arrival. Emma wondered if he regretted his offer of continued shelter. Well, that's settled then, Mrs. Fletcher said briskly. I'll return tomorrow with more provisions and my overnight things. She gathered her shawl around her shoulders. We should head back now before it gets too dark, Mr. Eaves. You're leaving. Emma couldn't keep the note of alarm from her voice. Mrs. Fletcher patted her hand. Just for tonight, dear. I need to arrange my affairs in town before coming to stay. Mr. Eaves will remain until I return. She lowered her voice again. Propriety requires I make a show of concern, but rest assured, your rescuer's reputation is spotless. You're in good hands. After the older woman mounted her horse, Zach lingered a moment. Need anything from town while I'm there. We'll be back by midday tomorrow. Emma shook her head. Mrs. Fletcher has been most generous. I'll be fine until your return. He nodded, adjusting his hat. Bar the door after we leave. Got a rifle by the bed if you need it, though nothing more dangerous than coyotes roams these parts most days. I'll be careful, she promised. As they rode away, Emma stood in the doorway watching until they disappeared among the trees. The wilderness that had seemed so threatening the day before now felt strangely peaceful, a buffer between her and the expectations that awaited her in Leadville. For a fleeting moment, she imagined what it might be like to stay here, in this simple cabin with its books and quietude. But such thoughts were foolish. She had come west for a purpose, to teach and to build something meaningful after the loss of her family. One near-death experience and a handsome rescuer weren't reason enough to abandon those plans. Still, as she barred the door and settled by the fire with Zach's copy of Shakespeare, Emma couldn't help but wonder what kind of man found solace in both this wilderness and the works of the bard. Zachary Eaves was becoming a more interesting puzzle with each passing hour. The following days established a routine that should have felt strange, but instead developed a comfortable rhythm. Mrs. Fletcher arrived as promised, bringing more supplies and setting up her own sleeping area near the fire. Zach moved his few personal belongings to a lean-to he constructed nearby, giving the women full use of the cabin while maintaining his role as protector from a respectful distance. During the days, Emma found herself drawn to Zach's company as he showed her the surrounding area. He pointed out edible plants, taught her to recognize animal tracks, and demonstrated how to gauge weather changes from cloud patterns and wind direction. You know a great deal about surviving out here, she observed as they sat by a small stream not far from the cabin, watching trout dart among the stones. Zach shrugged. Had to learn. Came west when I was 17, green as spring grass. Nearly died that first winter. His expression grew distant. Old Cheyenne man found me half frozen in a blizzard, dragged me to his camp. By all rights, he should have left me to die. White men had done his people no favors. But he saved you. Changed me too. Lived with his family through winter and spring. Taught me to read the land, respect what it gives and what it takes. He picked up a stone, turning it over in his hand. Went back east once after that. Couldn't breathe right with all those buildings, all those people crowded together. Yet you have Shakespeare in your cabin, Emma noted. A smile ghosted across his face. Man can live in the wild without being wild himself. He skipped the stone across the water's surface, where it bounced 5 times before sinking. What about you? Why leave Boston for a mining town like Leadville? Emma watched the ripples spread from where the stone had disappeared. After my parents died, influenza took them both last winter. There was nothing keeping me there. I had been teaching at a small ladies' seminary, but—" She paused, memories surfacing. There was a disagreement with the headmistress about teaching methods. She believed education for women should focus on social graces and basic literacy. I believed differently, and Leadville seemed the place to put your theories into practice. There was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity. Leadville needs teachers, she said simply, and I needed a fresh start, somewhere my ideas might matter. She smiled ruefully. Though I admit, I didn't anticipate quite so fresh a start as losing everything I owned in a river crossing. Some might call that fate, Zach said, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. You believe in fate, Mr. Eaves? Emma asked, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how comfortable she had become in his presence. I believe in being ready when opportunity presents itself, he replied. Good or bad? The sound of Mrs. Fletcher calling from the cabin interrupted whatever Emma might have said in response. As they walked back together, she was acutely conscious of Zach's presence beside her, solid, reassuring, and increasingly essential to her sense of well-being in this new land. That evening, as they sat around the cabin's table sharing a meal of fresh-caught trout and wild greens, Mrs. Fletcher regaled them with stories of Leadville's early days. You can scarcely imagine what it was like 5 years ago, she told Emma. Just a scattering of tents and crude shelters when they first struck silver. Now we've got proper buildings, 3 churches, a theater, and even a French restaurant, if you can believe it. And the school? Emma asked. Sturdy enough, though small, Mrs. Fletcher replied. About 30 children when they all attend, which isn't as regular as it should be. The mines pay boys as young as 10 to work sorting ore. Emma's expression hardened. That will change. Mrs. Fletcher and Zach exchanged glances. The mining companies have their own ideas about education, the older woman said gently. They need workers more than scholars. Children need to be children, Emma insisted. And everyone deserves the chance to imagine a different future. You'll have your work cut out for you, Zach observed, but there was respect in his eyes as he looked at her across the table. Later, after Mrs. Fletcher had retired for the night, Emma found Zach sitting outside on a rough-hewn bench, smoking a pipe and gazing at the stars. She hesitated in the doorway, aware that seeking him out might seem forward. Can't sleep? He asked without turning. The nights are so quiet here, she said, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as she joined him. In Boston, there was always some sound: carriages, neighbors, the watchman's call. You get used to it, Zach replied. After a while, you start hearing things you missed before: the owl hunting over the ridge, foxes moving through the underbrush, even the sound of the stars. Emma smiled at that. Stars don't make sound, don't they? He tapped out his pipe against the bench. Maybe you're just not listening right. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night air cool but not uncomfortable. Emma found herself studying his profile in the moonlight, the strong line of his jaw beneath his neatly trimmed beard, the slight crease between his eyebrows that suggested habitual concentration. Thank you, she said suddenly. He turned to look at her. For what? For saving my life, of course. But also for, she gestured vaguely, for making me feel welcome in a place that should feel alien. Zach considered this. First time I met a Ute hunting party, I was scared half to death, he admitted. Chief could have had me killed with a nod. Instead, he shared his fire, gave me food when I was hungry, taught me something about hospitality that day. Is that why you helped me? Hospitality? He was quiet for a long moment. No, madam, that was something else entirely. The weight of unspoken words hung between them, possibilities as vast as the star-filled sky above. Emma felt a flutter in her chest, a sensation both alarming and exhilarating. "I should get some rest," she said, rising abruptly. "Mrs. Fletcher mentioned we might ride to Leadville tomorrow to see the school." Zach nodded, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Sleep well, Miss Nelson." "Emma," she corrected softly. "After all we've been through, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." A smile curved his mouth. "Emma, then. Good night." "Good night, Zach." As she slipped back into the cabin, Emma pressed a hand to her racing heart. Whatever was happening between her and Zachary Eaves went far beyond gratitude for a rescue. In just a few days, he had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate even to herself, and in a few more days, she would move to Leadville to begin her teaching duties. Their paths would naturally diverge. The thought brought an unexpected pang of loss, as if she were leaving something precious behind before she'd had the chance to discover its true value. Leadville appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, the town sprawling across the mountainside like scattered blocks a child had abandoned. Emma took in the sight with wide eyes, weathered wooden buildings interspersed with newer brick structures, streets busy with wagons and pedestrians, and above it all, the skeletal frames of mine headworks dotting the surrounding slopes. "Quite a sight, isn't it, Mrs. Fletcher said proudly from her seat beside Emma in Zach's wagon. "Fastest-growing town in Colorado, they say." "It's larger than I expected," Emma admitted, noting the saloons that seemed to occupy every third building, their facades garishly painted to attract miners with money to spend. Zach, handling the reins with practiced ease, caught her expression. "Town has its rough edges," he acknowledged. "But decent folk live here too. Just have to know where to look." As they rolled down Harrison Avenue, Leadville's main thoroughfare, Emma attracted curious glances from passers-by. News of the new schoolteacher's river misadventure had clearly spread. "The school's just ahead," Mrs. Fletcher pointed out. "And there's Reverend Parker waiting for us." A tall, thin man in a black coat stood before a modest clapboard building with a small bell tower. He stepped forward as Zach brought the wagon to a halt, his expression a mixture of concern and relief. "Miss Nelson, what a blessing to see you safe and sound when we heard about your accident." He helped her down from the wagon with formal courtesy. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing Mr. Eaves to your rescue at precisely the right moment." "Indeed he does, Reverend," Emma replied, smoothing her borrowed dress. "I'm grateful for his providence." "And we're grateful he's delivered you to us," the Reverend said. "The children of Leadville have been without proper instruction for too long." He gestured toward the school building. "Would you care to see your domain?" Emma glanced back at Zach, who nodded encouragingly. "We'll bring your things to Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house," he said. "Take your time." The school was simple but adequate, one large room with rows of battered desks, a wood stove for heating, and a teacher's desk on a slightly raised platform at the front. A blackboard hung on the wall behind it, and bookshelves mostly empty lined one side of the room. "Our library is somewhat limited," Reverend Parker admitted, following her gaze. "Perhaps you could advise us on suitable additions once you're settled." Emma ran her hand along the teacher's desk, imagining herself standing before a classroom of frontier children. Despite the building's modest appearance, it represented everything she had journeyed west to find: purpose, independence, the chance to make a difference. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. The Reverend beamed. "Excellent. Now about your accommodations, Mrs. Fletcher has generously offered a room in her boarding house until the school term begins. After that, the living quarters above the Mercantile will be ready." They continued their tour of the town, with Reverend Parker proudly pointing out Leadville's amenities: the churches, the assay office, the new opera house under construction. Emma noted the contrasts of the frontier boomtown. Ladies in fashionable dresses stepping carefully around mud puddles while miners in dirt-encrusted clothing stumbled from saloons. Elegant carriages sharing streets with ore wagons. Signs advertising both fine millinery and cheap whiskey. By the time they rejoined Zach and Mrs. Fletcher at the boarding house, Emma's head was spinning with impressions and introductions. It seemed half the town had found reason to cross their path and meet the new schoolteacher. Overwhelming, isn't it? Zach asked quietly as he helped carry her borrowed belongings to the room Mrs. Fletcher had prepared. A bit, Emma admitted. Everyone has been very welcoming, but you're wondering what you've gotten yourself into, he finished for her. She smiled ruefully. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who felt the same way once. He set down the trunk Mrs. Fletcher had provided. Leadville takes some getting used to, but it grows on you. Will I see you often? Once I'm settled here, I mean. The question slipped out before Emma could consider its propriety. Zach's expression was unreadable. I come to town for supplies, deliver game to the hotels sometimes, scout for the mining companies when they're expanding operations. Not a promise, but not a refusal either. Emma tried to mask her disappointment. Of course. You must be busy with your own affairs. Emma, he said, his use of her given name drawing her eyes to his. What happened at the river? People don't go through something like that together and just walk away. Before she could respond, Mrs. Fletcher bustled into the room, arms full of fresh linens. Mr. Eaves, I believe the Reverend was hoping to speak with you before you head back. Something about a hunting expedition for the church picnic next month. Zach nodded, touching the brim of his hat in a small salute to Emma. Ladies. With that, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairs. Mrs. Fletcher watched Emma's gaze follow him. He's a good man, she said simply. Not many like him left, especially in these parts. I owe him my life, Emma replied, turning to help with the bedding, and nothing else. The older woman asked shrewdly. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Fletcher, I've known Mr. Eaves for less than a week. Sometimes a week is more than enough, came the gentle response. My late husband proposed 3 days after we met. Knew right away he did. She shook out a pillowcase with a snap. Not saying it's the same with you and Mr. Eaves, just saying time isn't always the best measure of such things. That night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Emma found herself comparing the noise of Leadville distant piano music from the saloons, occasional shouts or laughter, the rumble of late wagons with the profound quiet of Zach's cabin. Both had their appeal, but she was surprised to find herself missing the latter. She missed his presence to the quiet confidence he exuded, the surprising gentleness behind his weathered exterior. In the days they'd spent together, she'd glimpsed a man of depth and principle, someone who had found his place in this rugged land without surrendering his humanity. Was Mrs. Fletcher right? Could meaningful attachments form so quickly? Or was she simply confusing gratitude with deeper feelings? Emma turned over, punching her pillow into a more comfortable shape. Whatever the case, she had come to Leadville for a purpose. Romantic entanglements, however tempting, would only complicate her position as the town's teacher. Propriety demanded a certain distance, a respectability that frontier towns scrutinized even more closely than eastern cities. Yet as sleep finally claimed her, her last thoughts were of blue eyes and a steady voice saying, "Hold on tight, I've got you." The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Emma's position as Leadville's new teacher made her something of a minor celebrity, with townspeople regularly stopping by Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house to introduce themselves and, often, to present her with small gifts to replace those lost in the river books for the schoolroom. a hand-knitted shawl, a sturdy desk set. Some of her possessions had indeed been recovered downstream, a trunk containing clothing, though water-damaged. And miraculously, her teaching certificates and letters of recommendation, which had been sealed in an oilskin pouch that kept them mostly dry. The town council formally confirmed her appointment upon reviewing these credentials, setting her salary at $40 per month, generous by frontier standards. Emma threw herself into preparing the schoolhouse, cataloging the existing books, creating lesson plans appropriate for the varied ages and educational backgrounds she expected to encounter. The work was fulfilling, exactly what she had hoped to find in coming west. Yet something was missing. Or rather, someone. Zach had returned to his cabin after seeing her settled in Leadville. Though he came to town occasionally, their encounters were brief and formal, always in public, always under the watchful eyes of the community. Emma found herself watching for him on Harrison Avenue, heart quickening whenever she spotted a tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat, only to feel a strange deflation when it proved to be someone else. "He's giving you space, Mrs. Fletcher observed one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, enjoying the cool mountain air. "Letting you establish yourself as the teacher, not just the woman he pulled from the river." "That's considerate of him," Emma replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Mrs. Fletcher's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Might be worth letting him know if his consideration isn't necessary." "Mrs. Fletcher, I couldn't possibly. Times are different here than in Boston," the older woman interrupted gently. "Out here, life's too short and too hard to waste time on unnecessary propriety." She patted Emma's hand. "Just something to consider." 2 days before the school term was to begin, Emma was organizing her desk when a shadow fell across the doorway. She looked up to find Zach standing there, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the school setting. "Mr. Eaves," she said, surprised at how her pulse quickened at the sight of him. "This is unexpected." "Hope I'm not interrupting," he replied, stepping just inside the door. "Not at all. I'm just preparing for Monday." Emma gestured to the neat stacks of primers and slates. "Please come in." He moved further into the room, glancing around with interest. "Place looks different, brighter somehow." Emma smiled, pleased by his observation. She had indeed transformed the space, hanging maps and alphabet charts, arranging the desks in a more orderly fashion, adding wildflowers in jars along the windowsills. Children respond better to a welcoming environment. Zach nodded, then seemed to remember something. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Brought you something. For your school." Emma accepted the package, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a beautifully illustrated book of natural history, focusing on the flora and fauna of the Rocky Mountains. She opened it to find detailed drawings of plants, animals, and geological formations, each labeled with both common and scientific names. "Zach, this is wonderful," she breathed, turning the pages with care. "Where did you find it?" "Denver last trip. Thought it might help your students understand the land they live on." He shifted slightly. "Knowledge isn't just about far-off places. Sometimes it's right under your feet." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. It revealed an understanding of her educational philosophy that she hadn't explicitly shared with him. "Thank you. It's perfect." Their eyes met, and for a moment the schoolroom seemed to fade away, leaving only the connection between them. Emma became acutely aware of how much she had missed his company, his quiet strength and unexpected insights. Zach cleared his throat. "There's another reason I came by. Town's having a celebration tomorrow night, last hurrah before the children return to school. Dancing, food, that sort of thing." He hesitated. Thought you might like to attend with me." Emma felt a flutter of excitement, like a social engagement. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Like a dance, Emma." The use of her given name, rare in their public encounters, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "I'd be delighted," she replied, perhaps too quickly. "I'll call for you at 7 then." He settled his hat back on his head. "Better let you get back to your preparations." As he turned to leave, Emma called after him. "Zach," he paused, looking back. "I've missed our conversations." Something in his expression softened. "Me too," he said simply, and then he was gone, leaving Emma staring at the doorway long after his footsteps had faded away. The following evening found Emma in a state of nervous anticipation as she prepared for the town celebration. Mrs. Fletcher had helped her select a dress from her salvaged belongings, a blue silk that had required extensive pressing to remove the water damage, but was still her finest garment. "You look lovely," Mrs. Fletcher assured her as Emma fretted before the small mirror in her room. "Like a proper schoolmistress, but with just enough sparkle to turn heads." "You think it's too much?" Emma asked, smoothing the material over her hips. "I don't want to appear frivolous," Mrs. Fletcher chuckled. "My dear, you're going to a dance with the most eligible bachelor in the county. Frivolous is the least of what they'll be calling you behind your back." "Mrs. Fletcher." "Oh, don't look so scandalized. I'm teasing you." The older woman adjusted a pin in Emma's upswept hair. "Mostly. People will talk, that's the nature of small towns. But they'll forget all about it once they see what a fine teacher you are." At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at the boarding-house door. Mrs. Fletcher went to answer it, returning with Zach in tow. Emma's breath caught at the sight of him. He was dressed in what was clearly his finest, a dark coat over a crisp white shirt, his usual trail dust nowhere in evidence. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, though a rebellious curl still fell across his forehead. But it was his expression as he caught sight of her that truly stole her breath, a look of such honest admiration that Emma felt herself blushing to the roots of her hair. "Miss Nelson," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed something far less formal. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, Mr. Eaves," she replied, equally formal. "You're quite handsome yourself." Mrs. Fletcher looked between them with barely concealed delight. "Well, you two should be off. The celebration will be starting soon." The town square had been transformed for the event. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between buildings, casting a golden glow over the proceedings. A platform had been erected for the musicians, a fiddle player, a banjo player, and a man with a concertina. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by the townsfolk, and a space had been cleared for dancing. As they approached, Emma was acutely aware of the glances and whispers their arrival prompted. Zach seemed oblivious, or perhaps simply unconcerned, as he guided her toward the gathering with a light touch at her elbow. Reverend Parker spotted them and hurried over. "Miss Nelson, Mr. Eaves, wonderful to see you both." He beamed approvingly. "Our new teacher should certainly be part of this celebration. After all, education is the cornerstone of civilization, even here in the wilderness." "Couldn't agree more, Reverend," Zach replied politely. "Miss Nelson has already done wonders with the schoolhouse." More introductions followed to the mayor and his wife, to several members of the town council, to parents eager to discuss their children's educational needs. Through it all, Zach remained at Emma's side, occasionally offering a comment but mostly content to let her take center stage. When the music started, Zach turned to her. "May I have this dance, Miss Nelson?" Emma placed her hand in his. "I'd be honored, Mr. Eaves." The musicians struck up a lively reel, and Zach led her into the dance with surprising grace for a man more at home on horseback than in a ballroom. His hand at her waist was respectful but firm, guiding her through the steps with confidence. "You dance well," she observed as they circled each other. "Don't look so surprised," he replied with a hint of humor. "Even cowboys have social occasions." "I'm learning not to be surprised by your hidden talents," Emma said. "Shakespeare dancing. What else don't I know about Zachary Eaves?" His expression grew thoughtful. "Plenty, I expect. Same as there's plenty I don't know about you. Is that something you'd like to remedy?" The question was bold, more forward than Emma would ever have been in Boston society. Zach's grip on her waist tightened slightly as he guided her through a turn. "Very much," he said quietly, his eyes holding hers. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing, conversation, and shared laughter. Emma found herself relaxing into the community's embrace, no longer feeling like an outsider. And always, there was Zach, a steady presence, introducing her to people he knew, making sure she had refreshments, watching her with an intensity that both thrilled and unsettled her. As the hour grew late and families with children began to depart, the music slowed to more intimate melodies. Zach led Emma to the edge of the dancing area. "Walk with me," he asked, nodding toward the quieter streets beyond the square. They strolled in companionable silence for a while, the sounds of the celebration fading behind them. The night was clear, stars brilliantly visible in the mountain sky, the air cool but not uncomfortable. "Nervous about Monday?" Zach asked finally. "First day of school and all." "A little," Emma admitted. "Though I've taught before, this feels different, these children." She searched for the right words. "Their lives are so different from what I knew growing up. I want to give them something valuable, something that matters here, not just recitation and memorization." "You will," Zach said with quiet certainty. "You understand what's important." They had reached a small park, little more than a cleared area with a few benches. Zach guided her to one and they sat, still maintaining a proper distance between them. "Emma," he began, then hesitated. "I'm not good with fancy words. Never had much schooling myself beyond what I picked up along the way." "You do fine with words," she assured him. He smiled briefly. "Maybe so, but what I'm trying to say is—" He looked out at the distant mountains, gathering his thoughts. "That day at the river. When I saw your wagon going under, something happened. Can't explain it exactly. Just knew I had to get to you, that it mattered more than anything." Emma's heart quickened. "I'm grateful you did." "It's not about gratitude," Zach said, turning to face her directly. "These past weeks, staying away, giving you space to find your footing here, hardest thing I've done in a long while." "Why did you?" she asked softly. "Because you came here with a purpose, to teach, to make something of yourself away from your past." His eyes searched hers. "Didn't want to interfere with that. Still don't. But I can't stop thinking about you, about the way you light up talking about your students or the land or even Shakespeare." Emma felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly took her breath away. "I've thought about you too," she confessed. "More than I probably should." Zach reached out slowly, taking her gloved hand in his. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see where this might go, if you're willing." The propriety that had been ingrained in Emma since childhood warred with the feelings this man stirred in her. In Boston, such a rapid attachment would be considered unseemly at best, scandalous at worst. But Mrs. Fletcher was right, the frontier operated by different rules. Life here was too uncertain, too precious to waste on unnecessary conventions. "I'd like that," she said finally, squeezing his hand. "Very much." The smile that broke across Zach's face was like sunrise over the mountains, gradual at first, then brilliant. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then I'm the luckiest man in Colorado territory." As they walked back toward the boarding house, hands still clasped, Emma felt a sense of rightness, as if the river's current that had nearly claimed her life had instead carried her exactly where she was meant to be. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect weather for the first day of school. Emma rose early, donning her most professional attire, a high-necked brown dress with modest trim, her hair pulled back severely, every inch the proper schoolmistress. But as she pinned her cameo brooch at her throat, she couldn't help but smile at the memory of Zach's parting words the night of the dance. "You'll be wonderful. Those kids don't know how lucky they are." The schoolhouse was already buzzing with activity when she arrived. Children of various ages milled about the yard, some looking excited, others apprehensive, a few older boys affecting disinterest that didn't quite mask their curiosity about the new teacher. Emma rang the bell that hung by the door, its clear tone bringing a gradual hush to the chatter. "Good morning," she called out. "I'm Miss Nelson, your new teacher. Please form a line by age, youngest at the front, and we'll go inside to begin our day." There was a moment of confusion, then compliance as approximately 25 children sorted themselves. Emma noted the diversity of her new pupils, from carefully dressed children of merchants and professionals to the rough clothing of miners' offspring, some as young as 6, others nearly grown at 16 or 17. Inside, she directed them to seats, youngest at the front, oldest at the back, then took her place at the teacher's desk. "Welcome," she began. "I'm very pleased to meet all of you. We're going to start by learning a little about each other." The morning progressed smoothly as Emma assessed her students' varying levels of education. Some could barely recognize letters, while others demonstrated surprising proficiency in arithmetic or history. She organized them into groups based on ability rather than age, an unconventional approach that drew confused looks but allowed her to better address their needs. At midday break, as the children ate their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Emma noticed a familiar figure approaching from down the street. Zach carried a small basket, his stride purposeful. "Thought you might not have time for lunch your first day," he said by way of greeting, handing her the basket. Inside, she found fresh bread, cheese, and early apples. "Nothing fancy." "It's perfect," Emma said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "How did you know, Mrs. Fletcher mentioned you were too nervous to eat breakfast." He glanced at the children playing nearby. "How's it going?" Emma followed his gaze. "Better than I expected. They're eager to learn, most of them, though I'm already seeing the problem with attendance. Several boys are missing because they're working in the mines." Zach's expression darkened. "It's how families survive here. Not saying it's right, but it's reality." "Reality can change," Emma replied firmly. He studied her for a moment, then smiled. "If anyone can change it, you can." He tipped his hat. "Better let you get back to your duties, Miss Nelson. Just wanted to make sure you were doing all right." "I am," she assured him. "Thank you, Mr. Eaves." As Zach turned to leave, one of the older boys approached, eyeing him with undisguised admiration. "You're Zach Eaves, ain't you? The scout who tracked down them outlaws last year." Zach regarded the boy seriously. "That was a long time ago, and it's aren't you not ain't you. Your teacher would want you to mind your grammar." The boy glanced at Emma, then back at Zach. "Yes, sir." "Aren't you the scout?" "I am. But tracking outlaws isn't half as important as what you're doing right here." Zach nodded toward the schoolhouse. "Learning to read and figure will take you further than any trail I ever followed." The boy seemed skeptical but impressed that Zach would speak to him as an equal. "You really believe that?" "Wouldn't say it if I didn't." Zach extended his hand. "Zachary Eaves." "Thomas Jenkins," the boy replied, straightening his shoulders as they shook hands. "Good to meet you, Thomas." "You mind what Miss Nelson teaches you, all right?" "Yes, sir." As Zach walked away, Emma noticed several students watching him with newfound interest. His endorsement of education carried weight that her own words might not, particularly with the older boys. "Was that your beau, Miss Nelson?" asked a bold girl of about 12, her eyes bright with curiosity. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That was Mr. Eaves, friend who was kind enough to bring me lunch." She clapped her hands briskly. "Now then, time to return to our lessons. Everyone inside, please." The afternoon session went as smoothly as the morning, and by the time Emma dismissed the children at 4 o'clock, she felt a deep satisfaction. There were challenges ahead, varying abilities, irregular attendance, limited materials, but also tremendous potential. These children, with their frontier resilience and hunger for knowledge, could accomplish great things with the right guidance. As the days turned into weeks, Emma settled into a routine. Mornings and afternoons were devoted to teaching, evenings to grading and planning lessons. She took her meals at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, gradually getting to know the other boarders, a young clerk from the assay office, an elderly widow who had followed her son west, a traveling salesman who came and went with the seasons. And then there was Zach. True to his word, he was giving her the chance to see where their connection might lead, calling on her properly twice a week, Wednesdays for walks after school and Sundays after church. Their outings were conducted with perfect propriety, often including Mrs. Fletcher or other chaperones, but even these circumscribed encounters deepened Emma's feelings for him. She learned about his past, his childhood in Pennsylvania, as the son of a blacksmith, his decision to head west after his parents died in a fire, his years of wandering before finding a home in the Colorado high country. In turn, she shared stories of her Boston upbringing, her passion for education that had sometimes put her at odds with more traditional institutions, her dreams of creating a school where children could truly flourish. "You're doing it," Zach told her one Sunday afternoon as they sat on a hillside overlooking Leadville, Mrs. Fletcher discreetly reading a book some distance away. "Town's already noticing the difference." "It's early days yet," Emma demurred, though she was pleased by his observation. Attendance had indeed improved, with several working boys now coming for evening sessions she had organized specifically for them. "Miners are talking," Zach continued. "Even the foremen. Some are starting to see that educated workers might be valuable." Emma plucked a stem of grass, twirling it between her fingers. "It's not enough for them to see education as just another way to get more from their workers. I want them to value knowledge for its own sake." Zach smiled. "One battle at a time, schoolmistress." She looked at him then, this man who had saved her life and was now, slowly but surely, claiming her heart. "Is that what you think this is? A battle? All important things are in their way." He reached out, gently taking the grass stem from her fingers. "Worth fighting for, though." The double meaning in his words wasn't lost on Emma. "Yes," she agreed softly, "they are." October brought colder weather and the town's harvest festival. Emma's students presented a program of recitations and songs, their performance drawing appreciative applause from parents and townspeople alike. Even the mine owners attended, their interest piqued by reports of the new teacher's unconventional but effective methods. "Miss Nelson," said Harold Whitcomb, owner of the largest silver mine in the area, approaching her after the program. "Impressive work with the children. Particularly young Thomas Jenkins hardly recognized him up there, speaking so well." "Thank you, Mr. Whitcomb," Emma replied, wary but polite. Thomas was one of her evening students, still working in the mines by day. "He's a remarkably bright boy." "So I see." Whitcomb stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Been thinking about what you said at the town meeting last month, about education being an investment in the future." Emma had indeed spoken at the meeting, advocating for better school funding and stricter enforcement of child labor restrictions. Her speech had been met with mixed reaction, support from parents and some business owners, resistance from others who depended on cheap labor. "I stand by those words," she said carefully. "As you should." Whitcomb surprised her with a smile. "Which is why I'm proposing a scholarship fund for promising students. Boys and girls too, I suppose, who show aptitude could continue their education in Denver or even back east, with the understanding they'd return to apply their knowledge here." Emma was momentarily speechless. "Mr. Whitcomb, that's remarkably generous." He waved away her praise. "Good business, Miss Nelson. Leadville needs educated citizens to grow properly. Can't all be saloons and brothels forever." As Whitcomb moved away to speak with the mayor, Zach appeared at Emma's side. "Looks like you've converted the most hard-headed businessman in town," he observed. "Apparently even silver mine owners can see reason," Emma replied, still somewhat dazed by the conversation. Zach's hand brushed hers briefly. "You're changing things, just like you said you would." Pride was evident in his voice. "Though I'm not surprised. Knew you were something special the moment I pulled you from that river." Emma felt a rush of warmth at his words. "Did you really?" "Well," he admitted with a slight smile, "first I thought you were the most bedraggled woman I'd ever seen. But then you started talking about your teaching position with half the river still in your hair, and I knew." "Knew what?" she pressed. His eyes held hers, serious now. "That you were the kind of person who doesn't let a little thing like nearly drowning stop her from doing what she believes in." The festival continued into the evening, with dancing and feasting under a canopy of stars and lanterns. Emma and Zach moved among the townspeople as a recognized couple now, their courtship tacitly accepted by the community. When they danced, his hand at her waist seemed to belong there, and the way he looked at her made Emma forget the chill in the October air. Later, as the celebration wound down, Zach led her away from the crowds toward the edge of town. "Want to show you something," he said mysteriously. They walked to a small rise overlooking Leadville, where a wooden bench had been placed. The view was spectacular, the town's lights twinkling below, mountains rising dark against the star-filled sky. "My favorite spot," Zach explained as they sat. "Come here sometimes to think, watch the town grow and change." Emma drew her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "It's beautiful. Been thinking a lot lately," he continued, his voice taking on an unusual hesitancy. "About the future, about what I want from life." Emma's heart quickened. "And what have you concluded?" Zach turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "That I want a life with purpose, that I want to build something lasting." He squeezed her hands gently. "That I want you, Emma Nelson, if you'll have me." For a moment, Emma couldn't speak, emotion closing her throat. This was faster than propriety dictated, but in her heart, she had known for weeks, perhaps since that moment in the river when he had said, "Hold on tight. I've got you," that Zachary Eaves was the man she wanted to build her life with. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" she managed finally. "Not doing a very good job of it, am I?" He smiled self-deprecatingly, then slid from the bench to one knee before her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. "Emma Nelson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple band of gold set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the starlight. It wasn't an ostentatious piece, but its elegance and sincerity perfectly reflected the man offering it. "Yes," Emma whispered, then more strongly. "Yes, Zach, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was beside her on the bench again, pulling her into an embrace that started gently but deepened as Emma responded with all the feelings she had kept carefully controlled during their proper courtship. When they finally drew apart, both somewhat breathless, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since I first saw you all fired up about teaching while still dripping river water." Emma laughed softly. "I wasn't at my best that day." "You were perfect," he countered. "Brave, determined, beautiful even when half drowned." His sincerity warmed her more than any flowery compliment could have. This man truly saw her and loved what he saw. "When?" she asked. "When should we marry?" Zach brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Soon as you're ready." "Spring, maybe, when the pass is clear. Give us time to build proper living quarters at my place, unless you'd rather stay in town." Emma considered this. "Your cabin would need expanding if I'm to continue teaching. The ride to town each day would be long." "Already thought of that," Zach said. "What if we built new? Halfway between town and my grazing lands. Close enough for your school duties but with room for a proper home, maybe even a small school of our own someday for those too far out to reach Leadville easily." The vision he painted resonated with Emma's own dreams. "You've given this serious thought." "Every day since I pulled you from that river," he admitted. "Just wasn't sure you'd say yes." Emma touched his face gently. "How could I not? You saved more than my life that day, Zach. You showed me what kind of man you are: brave, selfless, kind. The kind of man I want to build a life with." They returned to town hand in hand, Emma's ring catching the light from the festival lanterns. Mrs. Fletcher spotted it immediately when they rejoined the celebration. "Well, it's about time," she declared, embracing Emma warmly. "I was beginning to think Mr. Eaves would never work up the courage." "You knew?" Emma asked. "My dear, the whole town has been waiting for this announcement." Mrs. Fletcher patted Zach's arm approvingly. "Though he did ask my permission properly last week as your temporary guardian." Emma turned to Zach in surprise. "You did?" He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Seemed the right thing to do." News of their engagement spread quickly through the remaining festival goers. Congratulations poured in, along with good-natured teasing for Zach and curious questions about their plans. Even Reverend Parker approached, offering his services for the ceremony, whenever the happy couple decides the time is right. By the time they walked back to the boarding house, Emma felt almost overwhelmed by the community's enthusiastic response. "They're so invested in our happiness," she marveled. "You've become important to them," Zach replied. "To the children, the parents, to the future of Leadville." "And you've been part of this community longer than I have," Emma pointed out. "They respect you, value your contributions." Zach shook his head. "I was always on the edges, coming and going. You found a way to be at the heart of things." He squeezed her hand. "That's one of the many reasons I love you." It was the first time he had said those words directly, though Emma had felt them in his actions for weeks. "I love you too," she replied, the declaration simple but profound in the quiet night. At the boarding house door, he kissed her again properly this time, mindful of watching eyes from neighboring windows. "Good night, future Mrs. Eaves." "Good night, Mr. Eaves," she replied, touching his cheek gently before going inside. That night, Emma sat at her small desk, writing by lamplight to her few remaining relatives and friends in Boston. "I am engaged to be married," she wrote, the words seeming almost surreal on paper. How could she explain to them what had happened? How a near tragedy had led to the greatest joy she had ever known. "His name is Zachary Eaves," she continued, "and he saved my life when my wagon overturned in a river crossing. But more importantly, he has shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued for who I am and what I believe." She described his character, his intelligence, his quiet strength, trying to make them understand why she had given her heart so completely to this frontier man she had known for less than 3 months. Whether they would understand or not, Emma knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right decision. As she finally climbed into bed, the ring on her finger caught the moonlight streaming through her window. "Hold on tight," Zach had said that day in the river. "I've got you." And he did. Not just from the river's current, but for all the days to come. The months leading to their spring wedding passed more quickly than Emma could have imagined. Her teaching duties consumed most of her days, while evenings and weekends were often spent with Zach, planning their future home and life together. True to his word, Zach had purchased land halfway between Leadville and his existing ranch, a beautiful piece of property with a small stream, sheltering pines, and a meadow that would bloom with wildflowers come spring. Throughout the winter months, whenever weather permitted, he worked on building their home, aided by friends from town and his ranch partner, Will. Emma visited the construction site whenever possible, watching with growing excitement as walls rose and rooms took shape. The house was modest but thoughtfully designed, a comfortable living area, a kitchen with a large window overlooking the meadow, 2 bedrooms, one for them, one for the future, as Zach put it with a meaningful glance that made Emma blush, and a small study where Emma could prepare lessons and grade papers. "It's perfect," she told him on a crisp February day as they stood in what would be their living room, the roof newly completed but the interior still unfinished. Snow drifted down outside the windows, turning the world into a crystalline wonderland. "Not yet," Zach replied, putting his arm around her shoulders. "But it will be. By April, I promise." April 24, 1880 dawned clear and mild, as if nature herself approved of the union about to take place. Emma dressed in Mrs. Fletcher's spare bedroom, helped by the older woman and several female friends she had made during her months in Leadville. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant ivory silk ordered from Denver, with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in a crown of braids, adorned with small white flowers gathered from the lower slopes where spring had already arrived. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Fletcher said, stepping back to admire the effect. "Mr. Eaves won't know what hit him." "I'm nervous," Emma admitted, smoothing the silk skirt with trembling hands. "Not about marrying Zach," she added quickly. "Just about everything going well today." "Wedding days are never perfect," Mrs. Fletcher said wisely. "It's the marriage that matters, not the ceremony." The church was filled to capacity when Emma arrived on the arm of Mayor Thompson, who had offered to give her away in the absence of her father. Flowers adorned every pew, and sunlight streamed through the simple stained glass, casting colorful patterns across the wooden floor. And there at the altar stood Zach, looking more handsome than Emma had ever seen him in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. But it was his expression, as she walked down the aisle, that Emma would remember forever, a look of such profound joy and love that it brought tears to her eyes. Reverend Parker conducted the ceremony with dignified simplicity. They had chosen traditional vows, the ancient promises that had bound couples for generations. When Emma spoke the words "to love and to cherish, till death do us part," she meant them with every fiber of her being. And when Zach slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his eyes shone with emotion. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Parker declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled at Zach. "You may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of the church setting. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, the Reverend announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Zachary Eaves." The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and lively. It seemed all of Leadville had contributed something: food, music, decorations. Emma's students performed a special recitation they had prepared in secret, bringing happy tears to their teachers' eyes. There were toasts and dancing, laughter and good wishes from every quarter. "Happy?" Zach asked as they took a moment's respite from the festivities, standing together near an open window where the spring breeze offered welcome coolness. "Completely," Emma replied, leaning against him slightly. "Though I'll be happier still when we're finally alone." Zach's arm tightened around her waist. "Few more hours," he murmured close to her ear. "Then I have you all to myself." The propriety that had governed their courtship had sometimes been a frustration, particularly in recent months as their wedding day approached. Both had honored the boundaries of the time, but the anticipation of finally being together as husband and wife had grown almost unbearable. When they finally departed amid cheers and thrown flower petals, it was barely sunset. Zach helped Emma into the new buggy that had been his wedding gift to her, then took the reins and guided the horse toward their new home. "Mrs. Fletcher packed a basket for us," Emma said as they left the town behind. "Food for tonight and breakfast tomorrow." "Thoughtful of her," Zach replied, though his tone suggested food was not foremost on his mind. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the beauty of the spring evening enveloping them. The mountains were touched with alpenglow, that magical pink light that appeared at sunset, and the valleys below were already filling with purple shadows. "Still can't believe you're really my wife," Zach said finally, glancing at her profile. "Keep thinking I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." Emma placed her hand over his on the reins. "Not a dream. Though sometimes it feels like one, the schoolteacher from Boston and the frontier scout, brought together by a river crossing gone wrong." "Best wrong turn I ever took," Zach declared. "Though I suspect we would have found each other somehow, even without the river's help." As they approached their new home, Emma felt a flutter of anticipation. The house stood welcoming in the gathering dusk, windows glowing with the lamps that friends had lit before their arrival. Flowering branches adorned the front porch, and a hand-painted sign hung above the door. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Eaves." Zach halted the buggy, then turned to Emma. "Traditional to carry the bride across the threshold," he said with a smile. "Is it really necessary?" "I'm perfectly capable of walking," Emma teased. "Humor me," Zach replied, coming around to lift her down. "Been thinking about this moment for months." He scooped her into his arms with effortless strength, carrying her up the porch steps and through the front door into their new home. Inside, Emma was delighted to discover more surprises: furniture arranged perfectly, fresh flowers on the table, a fire laid in the hearth. "Our friends have been busy," she observed as Zach set her gently on her feet. "Community takes care of its own," he quoted, repeating what Mrs. Fletcher had told Emma months earlier. "And they wanted to make this special for us." The evening passed in a blur of discovery, exploration of their new home in its completed state, the wedding dinner shared at their own table, conversation that grew increasingly intimate as the hour grew later. And finally, the moment when Zach took Emma's hand and led her to their bedroom, where the bed was turned down invitingly, more flowers scenting the air from a vase on the dresser. "Nervous?" he asked gently, noticing her hesitation in the doorway. "A little," she admitted. "Are you?" "Terrified," he replied with disarming honesty. "Want everything to be perfect for you." His vulnerability touched her deeply. Emma reached up to caress his face, now shadowed with evening stubble. "It already is perfect because it's us, together." What followed was a revelation, tender, passionate, and ultimately profound in a way Emma had not anticipated. In Zach's arms, she discovered aspects of herself previously unknown, while learning the landscape of his body with increasing confidence. Their joining transcended physical pleasure, becoming a communion of souls that left them both shaken and transformed. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Emma rested her head on Zach's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Is it always like that?" she wondered aloud. His chuckle rumbled beneath her ear. "Don't rightly know, first time for me too." Emma propped herself up to look at him. "What, but you're—" She hesitated, embarrassed. "Older, more experienced in life," Zach supplied. "Maybe so, but not in this." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Wanted to wait for the right woman. For love." The admission humbled her. "Thank you for telling me." "No secrets between us," Zach said simply. "Not now. Not ever." Emma settled back against him, profoundly moved by his trust and honesty. "I love you, Zachary Eaves." "And I love you, Emma Eaves." His arm tightened around her. "More than I have words to say." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the first of many nights to come in their shared life. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. Emma continued teaching at the Leadville school, riding to town each morning and returning home in the afternoon. Sometimes Zach would meet her halfway, riding alongside her buggy, talking about their respective days. Other times, she would find him at home, preparing dinner or working on improvements to their property. The rhythm of their married life developed naturally shared meals and responsibilities. Quiet evenings reading by the fire or sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Nights of increasing intimacy and discovery. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the small irritations that required patience, the unexpected joys of partnership. "You're humming," Zach observed one October evening as Emma prepared vegetables for their supper. "Been doing that a lot lately." She glanced up with a smile. "Have I?" "I hadn't noticed." Zach leaned against the doorframe, studying her with those perceptive blue eyes. "You're different somehow, glowing almost." Emma felt warmth rise to her cheeks. She had been waiting for the right moment to share her news, wanting to be certain before raising hopes. "Perhaps I am." Understanding dawned on his face. "Emma, are you?" She nodded, setting down the knife and wiping her hands on her apron. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Zach, in spring." The joy that transformed his features was worth the wait. In 3 quick strides, he crossed the kitchen and gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "A baby, our baby." Emma laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Careful, you'll make me dizzy." He set her down immediately, his expression changing to concern. "Are you all right? Should you be resting?" "What did the doctor say?" "I'm perfectly fine," she assured him, touched by his solicitude. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know, and I'm healthy and strong." Zach placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A little one right in there." His voice was filled with wonder. "Boy or girl, do you think?" "It's far too early to tell," Emma replied, "though Mrs. Fletcher swears she can predict these things and says it's a boy." "A son," Zach murmured, then looked up at her. "Though a daughter would be just as wonderful. A little girl with your intelligence and spirit." They spent the evening planning and dreaming how they would arrange the second bedroom as a nursery. What adjustments Emma would need to make to her teaching schedule. Names they might consider for their child. "If it's a boy," Emma suggested, "perhaps William, after your friend and partner." Zach considered this. "William Zachary Eaves has a strong sound to it. And if it's a girl—" "What was your mother's name?" Zach asked. "Margaret," Emma replied, though everyone called her Maggie. "Margaret Emma Eaves," Zach tested the name. "Beautiful like her mother will be." As autumn progressed, Emma's condition became known in Leadville. The town responded with typical frontier practicality, and kindness adjustments were made to her teaching schedule. Older girls were trained to assist with younger children for when she would need to be absent, and gifts of baby clothing and blankets began to appear on her desk. Emma continued teaching through the winter, though Zach insisted on driving her to and from school himself when snow made the roads treacherous. By February, her condition was unmistakable, her slender frame now visibly rounded with new life. "You should consider stopping soon, Mrs. Fletcher advised during a Sunday visit. "That baby's growing well, and you need your rest." "Just until the end of the month," Emma promised. "My replacement is nearly ready to take over." She had been training a young woman from Denver, a recent normal school graduate eager to gain experience. "Zach told Will he's beside himself with worry every time you make the trip to town," Mrs. Fletcher confided, "though he'd never say as much to you directly." Emma sighed. "He's been so protective, sometimes overly so. It's his way of showing love," the older woman replied. "Men can't carry the babies, so they try to carry everything else instead." February gave way to March, and Emma reluctantly relinquished her classroom to Miss Taylor, her capable young replacement. The timing was fortunate, as a late-season blizzard swept through the mountains in mid-March, making travel impossible for nearly a week. "See," Zach said as they sat by the fire, watching snow pile against the windows. "This is why I wanted you home." Emma, now in her 8th month and finding movement increasingly difficult, had to concede the point. "I suppose you were right this time. Mark the calendar," he teased. "Historic moment my wife admits I was right about something." She swatted his arm playfully. "Don't get used to it. I'm only temporarily at a disadvantage." As March ended and April began, Emma's time grew near. The doctor from Leadville had provided instructions and promised to come when summoned, weather permitting. Mrs. Fletcher had volunteered to assist with the birth, having helped deliver dozens of babies in her time. On the morning of April 12, 1881, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Emma woke to the first contractions. She lay quietly for a moment, not wanting to alarm Zach prematurely. But when a second pain came, stronger than the first, she gently touched his shoulder. "Zach," she said calmly, "I think it's time to send for Mrs. Fletcher and the doctor." He was instantly alert, sitting up in bed. "The baby's coming now, are you sure?" Emma nodded, managing a smile despite the growing discomfort. "Reasonably sure, yes." What followed was a day of waiting, pain, and ultimately transcendent joy. Zach rode to town through muddy spring roads to fetch Mrs. Fletcher and the doctor, returning to find Emma pacing the bedroom, breathing through contractions that were still relatively mild. Mrs. Fletcher took charge with practiced efficiency, sending Zach for water, clean linens, and eventually banishing him from the bedroom entirely. "Men are no use at times like these," she declared. "Go split wood or something useful." The doctor arrived by mid-afternoon, examined Emma, and pronounced everything progressing normally. "First babies often take their time," he assured Zach, who was wearing a path in the living room floor with his pacing. "Your wife is young and strong. Try not to worry." As evening approached, Emma's labor intensified. Zach, unable to stay away despite Mrs. Fletcher's instructions, held her hand between contractions, wiping her brow with a cool cloth and murmuring encouragement. "Remember the river," he said as she gripped his hand through a particularly strong contraction. "You were so brave then. You're braver now." Emma managed a weak smile. "The river was easier," she gasped. "But the reward wasn't nearly as great," he reminded her, finally, as the spring day faded into twilight. The moment arrived. With a last heroic effort from Emma and expert guidance from Mrs. Fletcher and the doctor, their child entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the room. "A boy," the doctor announced triumphantly. and a fine one at that." Tears streamed down Zach's face as he looked from his exhausted wife to the red-faced, squalling infant being cleaned and swaddled by Mrs. Fletcher. "Emma, you did it," he whispered, pressing his lips to her damp forehead. "You were magnificent." When Mrs. Fletcher placed the tiny bundle in Emma's arms, she felt a love so overwhelming it seemed her heart might burst with it. "Hello, William," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Zach perched carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm around Emma's shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's downy head. "William Zachary Eaves," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world, little man." The baby's eyes, unfocused but alert, seemed to study his parents' faces. His tiny hand escaped the swaddling and waved erratically until Zach offered his finger, which the infant gripped with surprising strength. "Strong like his mother," Zach observed. "Handsome like his father," Emma countered, leaning against him wearily but contentedly. Mrs. Fletcher watched the new family with misty eyes. "I'll leave you three to get acquainted," she said, shooing the doctor out ahead of her. "Call if you need anything." Alone with their son, Emma and Zach marveled at the miracle they had created together. 10 perfect fingers, 10 perfect toes, a rosebud mouth that already showed signs of Zach's determined chin, eyes that might eventually turn the deep brown of Emma's own. "Hard to believe he started with a near drowning," Zach murmured, gently stroking the baby's cheek. "Everything important in my life began that day," Emma replied. "When the wagon sank in the river's current and you said, 'Hold on tight, I've got you.'" "Best thing I ever did," Zach said, kissing her temple. "Getting you out of that river, bringing you home, loving you." "We've come a long way from that river crossing," Emma observed, watching as their son's eyes drifted closed, his tiny face relaxing in sleep. "Just the beginning," Zach promised. "We've got a lifetime ahead, you, me, and William here. And maybe, someday, a sister or brother for him." Emma smiled tiredly. "Perhaps, though let's enjoy this one for a while first." As darkness fell outside, the small family remained together in the warm circle of lamplight, the teacher who had come west seeking purpose, the frontiersman who had found his heart's home, and the child who represented their shared future. Outside, spring rain began to fall gently, nourishing the wildflowers that would soon carpet the meadow around their home. The river that had nearly claimed Emma's life had instead given her everything she could have wished for: love, family, purpose, and a place to truly belong. As she drifted toward sleep, her son cradled securely against her and her husband's strong arm around them both. Emma knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, and in that knowledge was perfect contentment.